Okay, so let's get started and get this hour meter created. The first thing we want to do is we're going to load our hour meter run, which we've already created. Gotcha. So let's go ahead and create something, just call it a timer. And I will create that by a call. And we'll just go ahead and call that timer and just keep it really generic. And that will be a TON. Okay, so we have our timer in here, and before I actually call it, let's go ahead and put some properties into this thing. First thing, I loaded my hour meter. I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to put a jump C, and I'm going to call a routine called accumulate time. Alright, so we will jump C to accumulate time. Otherwise, if we don't accumulate time, we'll just jump to, we'll call it a stability routine. Okay, so now we've got two different possibilities based on hour meter run. So let's come down here and we're going to call this accumulate time with a colon. Before we call our timer, we want to set that timer up a little bit. That's going to be a second timer. So let's go ahead and load a time value of t-pound 1000 milliseconds, and that shouldn't be an A sign, that should be a pound. Okay, so we're going to load that, and then we're going to store that as our timer.pt. And the last thing we want to do is we're going to load up a true, and we're going to store that into our timer.in. So now our timer is actually going to be running. Perfect. So now that the timer's running, we need to also check and see if the timer has timed out. And if it has timed out, then we need to start accumulating this time locally. So we're going to now load timer.q, and we're going to conditionally jump to accumulate seconds. Otherwise, we're going to jump to our stability routine. And let's go ahead and make sure that we've got a tab in between there so it works. Got it. And then we need to create an accumulate seconds routine down here with a colon. So if we come down here, that means that we've got a full second on our clock. And if we do, we need to store that somewhere, and we'll call that seconds. But that's not going to be our main program seconds, that's just SECS. So we're just going to call it seconds in here. And we're going to need to do a load on that. So let's load seconds. That's going to be a DINT. Got it? And we're going to add 1 to that, because that's why we came down here. We just added another second. And we need to store that right back into seconds. So now that we've got our seconds in here and we've updated that value by adding 1 and stored that into the new seconds, let's see if that value that we've got on our plate is equal to 60. And if it is, then we need to jump C and accumulate our minutes. So let's just copy this name of accumulate seconds, paste it in there, and minor modification. Good. Otherwise, we can go ahead and jump to our stability routine. So let me go ahead and create that header, copy out our jump, and paste that right there. Alright, and then our accumulate minutes, man, that's going to look an awful lot like what we've already got here. So let's just go ahead and put that right there. And now we're going to be loading minutes. And that's also going to be a DINT. And you can tell we're in copy and paste mode now, so this is about to come a little faster. So we're going to add that, and if it equals 60, then we're going to go ahead and jump to accumulate hours. So if we come to accumulate seconds, that means our timer has expired, and the first thing we need to do is reset it. So let's start by loading false and storing that into timer.in, and then we need to call our timer. Okay, so now we just reset our timer so that when we come back in, it'll start over again. Likewise, when we come in here to accumulate seconds, that means we've reached 60 seconds up here. And while we're accumulating a minute, we also need to reset our seconds. So let's load 0, and then we're going to store that to seconds. And then we will load our minutes and we will go from there. So the last thing we need to do is then we need to accumulate some hours. So let's copy that out of there, come down here and paste it. And let me just scroll so I can get this on the screen. There we go. I hate working on the bottom of the screen. So the first thing we'll do is load 0, and we'll store that into minutes. Then we're going to load hours, and I doubt very seriously we're going to be in here for hours, but just in case, I want to build a halfway robust program. So let's copy that. We're going to store one more hour in here, and we can store hours as much as we want. We're not going to roll those up into hundreds of hours and days or anything like that. We're not going to go that crazy. So we don't need to worry about whether it's equal to 60 or not. We're just going to get rid of that. There are no more accumulators. And at this point, we will jump to our stability routine, as yet, which is undefined. And now we have a stability routine. So we can come back and we'll program that. But for now, let's go ahead and finish off our hour meter by rolling that into our main time. So we've already got our hour meter run being disabled in here, but now we also need to roll up that time that we've got. So we can do that by bringing in our hours, minutes, and seconds from our main program and adding that to everything that we've accumulated locally. Then we need to check and see if we need to do any roll-ups and manage those all accurately. Then we need to send them back and store them into the main program. So let's start by bringing those new values in. So we're going to load plc_program.seconds, and we're going to add to that seconds, and then we're going to store that to seconds. Then we can also load plc_program.minutes. Then we can add to that minutes, and we can store that as minutes. And lastly, we can load our plc_program.hours, and we can add to that not our hour meter, but our hours, and then we can store that into hours. So now we've brought in all of our main time that we already had stored, and we've accumulated that all into our local values. Now we're going to roll everything up. So we've already written those routines. Let's just close that and go right back into our main stability routine. And I want accumulate hours, and this should be called accumulate minutes. So we've already found a bug before it even became a problem. And let's make sure our jumps look good. We're jumping to minutes, seconds, hours. Okay, everything else looks good. So let's just select all of these accumulating routines. We'll copy that, close out of here, go back into our exit routine, and I'm just going to create a few spaces and drop those in here. So now we're storing everything locally. Now we need to start asking ourselves, do we have anything that's greater than 60? So to start, let's load, and we're going to load our seconds because we need to start at the bottom and roll our way up. And if seconds is GE, which is greater than or equal to 60, and it won't be greater than or equal to 120 because that would be impossible. All we could do is either be greater than 60 or less than 60. Then we're going to jump C to, and that's where we're going to go into our accumulate seconds routine. So I'll just copy that same name right here and paste it in. Got it? And otherwise, if we don't accumulate seconds, we're going to jump to test mins. So we're going to need something new here. So accumulating seconds, how are we going to do that? Well, we don't need to reset any timers, so we can get rid of all of this. We are going to load seconds, and we're going to subtract 60. We don't want to rock it all the way back to 0 because we really don't know how many seconds we had in there. We just know that we had more than a minute, so we need to knock that down a little bit. But what else we want to do then is we want to store that back into seconds. Then we want to load our minutes. We're going to add 1 to that, and I'm going to go ahead and just create a new line in here. And then we're going to store that into our minutes. Okay, so we've knocked seconds down by 60. We've bumped minutes up by 1. And from there, we don't need a condition. We are just going to jump into testing our minutes. So since we already need a separate location for that, let's just go ahead and make it right here. So what does test minutes look like? Well, we've already made sure our seconds are fine. So now we've got our seconds where we want. Now we just need to find out what our minutes look like. So let's go ahead and copy this right here. And actually, I'm just going to copy these 3 rungs. So let's copy those and bring them down. And here, instead of loading seconds, we're going to load minutes and see if our minutes are greater than or equal to 60. And if they are, we're going to jump to accumulate mins. Otherwise, if they aren't, then we're going to jump to test hours. So TEST-HRS. Now we've got our accumulate mins routine, and that's going to look a lot like our accumulate seconds routine. So let's go ahead and just copy the logic right out of there. And we will come right here and we'll just paste that in. So now instead of loading seconds, we're loading minutes. And we're going to subtract 60 from our minutes and store it right back in there. Then we're going to load our hours. We're going to add 1 and we're going to store it right back into there. And once we've got all that, there isn't anything else to test because we don't need to roll up any hours or anything like that. So actually, instead of calling this test hours, we'll just call this update hour meter. And from here, that's all we need to do is just update our hour meter. So instead of all of this extra routine, let's go ahead and define a new label. And here is where we will actually put everything back where we found it. So let me just create a couple of lines so that I can see what I'm working on here. And now I'm going to load seconds. And I'm going to store that into PLC program dot seconds. Then I'm going to load minutes, store that back into PLC program dot minutes. Then we will load our hours and store that right back into plc.hours. All right, I think that's got us. So now we should have our fully functional hour meter on this routine, which is catching everything and storing it right back where we want it. So I think that's good, and I also think that's a good place to break for the time being. So when we come back, we'll go ahead and jump in and start looking at actually programming out some of these routines. So I'll see you in the next lecture.